A top focus from WION right now. Despite Tokyo's assurance of continued war support for Ukraine, the Japanese people don't seem to be convinced about any unconditional backing for Kyiv. Well, last week, Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa made a surprise visit to Kyiv, where she promised Ukraine an additional $37 million for a drone detection system. And this followed Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's assurance of a $4.5 billion assistance for Kyiv. And that includes $1 billion in humanitarian aid. But while 77% Japanese initially endorsed Tokyo's support for Kyiv, the perception seems to have changed after the 7.6 magnitude earthquake struck the country on New Year's Day. According to a survey by international consultancy firm GlobalScan, there is growing criticism about continuing assistance to Kyiv. News outlets in Japan are hitting out at the government, asking the government to do more for the quake-hit victims instead of getting involved in someone else's war. Many outlets have also claimed that the aid is being siphoned off by corrupt government officials in Ukraine. The growing dissent of Japanese people over the Ukraine aid echoes the stance of Republicans in the U.S. U.S. conservatives want the money to be spent on controlling illegal migration from Mexico rather than spending it on aid for Kyiv. However, many still believe that Japan needs to stand by Ukraine if it wants to be seen as a reliable partner by the international community. Now, Japanese politician Ken Kato has said that Japan needs to support Kyiv in this war because it's a war for Japan as well. He also stressed that the failure to resist Russian advances on Ukraine would encourage China to invade Taiwan in the near future as well. And for more on the story, we are now being joined by Professor James D.J. Brown, international affairs expert. He's joining us live from Tokyo. Thanks very much for taking our time and joining us here on WION, Professor Brown.
Thank you.
Now, Japan's foreign minister has vowed continued support for Ukraine and has pledged $37 million in aid. But there seems to be a growing sense of criticism against aid being given to Ukraine. How do you assess this change of stance amongst the Japanese where the subject of Ukraine has become rather a subject of irritation?
Well, I think the trends that we're seeing in Japan are quite similar to what we're seeing in Europe and the United States as well. Overall, the government remains very committed to supporting Ukraine, recognizing that this is an issue not just of European security, but also affects international security as well. And yet at the same time, there is a degree of fatigue. A sense that perhaps despite the support, there haven't been the breakthroughs that Japan's government was hoping for from the Ukrainian side, and that at some point this conflict will have to be brought to an end.
Right, Professor Brown, there are other set of people as well in Japan that remain adamant on how the country must remain a reliable partner right now towards Ukraine. What is your read on that?
Yes, this has very much to do with China rather than Russia. The view, I think, still of the majority within Japan is that it's so important that Russia is not successful in its aggression against Ukraine, because were it to be so, then that would send a message that China could perhaps try and do something similar within East Asia, in particular towards Taiwan. And the Taiwan issue is really very much tied up with Japan's own security, because if there were to be an attack on Taiwan, it's almost certain that Japan would get drawn into that situation as well.
Right, Professor Brown, thanks very much for taking our time and joining us here on WION.